Since its conception, Dragon-type Pokemon were thought to be the strongest type. Heck, more than half of the pseudo-legendary Pokemon were part Dragon-type. And even though we've already been introduced to some Dragon-type specialists in the series, they didn't really know what they were doing. So today I'll be building the best Dragon-type Pokemon team, spanning across multiple regions and generations. Each Dragon-type Pokemon will be carefully selected to best represent this type, as well as some competitive analysis, making sure they can bring more than just good looks to the table. This means optimal movesets, abilities, items, and anything else to maximize their spot on the team. So with that, sit back, relax, get cozy, and let's dive right on in by truly understanding the Dragon type. Introduced to us at the start of Pokemon's conception, there are currently 75 Dragon type Pokemon across all 9 generations. That's 7.32% of Pokemon being in some way part Dragon type. Now that might seem pretty low, but remember, 80% of all pseudo-legendaries are part Dragon type, so that in itself is adding to their resume of sheer power. But what if I told you the typing itself isn't as juiced up as it was back in Generation 1? As a matter of fact, Generation 2 was the earliest example of Dragon types finally being humbled. With the introduction of Steel types, we had just received our first type to resist the dominant will of dragons. But this wouldn't be the last time our flying lizards would get kicked in the butt. Nope, because once fairy types were rolled out in Generation 6, our good old dragon lads got a brand new weakness. Now, not only being weak to themselves, because nothing says OP like being weak to yourself, right? But also ice types, who, let's be honest, have always been known to be kind of lackluster. And now the new fairy types, who entered this series on PEVs.
Performance enhancing vitamins.
But not only were fairy types a weakness for dragon types, but they also received an immunity to dragon types, making dragon type moves kinda weak for the first time. But speaking of moves, the dragon type does have a few incredible home run picks, and here are the ones that I think truly help the dragon type Pokemon rise. Starting with Generation 3's Dragon Dance, a move that increased your Pokemon's attack and speed by 1 stage. And as you can imagine, this setup move turns Pokemon like Flygon into absolute monsters if they were left unchecked. Then in Generation 8, we received Breaking Swipe, a move that also lowered the opposing Pokemon's attack stat, which kind of became a staple against many other opposing dragon type Pokemon, since they all shared a common weakness themselves. But before we get to building the best dragon type Pokemon team, here are some honorable mentions. And I'm definitely starting with every dragon type pseudo legendary Pokemon. Now you're probably wondering, why the heck are these in the honorable mentions and not in the actual team? Well, that's because if we're going to include pseudo legendaries in the best team, it would look something like this. Or maybe this? Either way, it's pretty boring to have a full team of pseudos, so instead I'm only going to be including one of them in the final team. Take your guesses in the comments now if you know who's making the cut. Otherwise, stay tuned and see who's the best dragon type pseudo legendary. But some really good Pokemon we should mention are Dragalge for its unique poison and dragon typing, giving it an edge against fairy types. Then there's Altaria and Noivern for their movesets, but also their immunity to ground types. And finally, one that can't go unnoticed is Tyrantrum, with its unique rock dragon typing, giving it an option against ice types. However, due to its less than stellar speed and move pool, means it doesn't quite make it onto our list today. Which brings us to the actual best dragon type Pokemon team, starting with Generation 2's Kingdra. Now, say what you want, but having a water dragon type that loses one of the 3 weaknesses is way too strong to not consider. Honestly, the only thing this dragon specialist had going for her. Now, as for this Pokemon's moveset, let's give it these moves. Dragon Dance to boost its stats, Wave Crash for stab, and the final 2 moves to counter any of its inherent weaknesses. Outrage for dragon types, and Iron Head for both ice types and fairies. And after a few dragon dances, this Kingdra could easily become a full team sweeper. We can also give this Pokemon the Lumberry to help counter Outrage's confusion, and for its ability, I think the defensive option fits best with Damp. And that's Kingdra for you. A very good start to the team. But who takes the spot of a strong second in command? Well, that's got to be Generation 9's Cyclizar. Now, before you guys start foaming at the mouth, let me explain why this Pokemon deserves a spot on the best Dragon-type team. One, it's got better base stats than both Dragalge and Altaria, who are already two really strong Dragon types. And two, for its ability to help set up the later Dragon team members with the move Shed Tail. You see, this Pokemon is all about utility and providing the rest of the team with power, control, and pressure. With its Shed Tail move, it could set up a substitute for another Pokemon and switch out at the cost of half its health. Rapid Spin to clear off any field hazards, Knock Off to remove enemy items like leftovers or Life Orb, and finally Taunt to stop enemy Pokemon from using non-damaging moves. But I guess you could also have U-Turn instead of Taunt to further synergize with this Pokemon's ability Regenerator, which keeps Cyclizar really healthy and around for much longer. As for its held item, let's give it heavy duty boots so it can switch into hazards and remove them with ease. Definitely a Pokemon that is a must-have if we truly hope to create the best, most cohesive Dragon-type Pokemon team ever. Next up has got to be a Pokemon that has been mistaken as a pseudo-legendary in the past, and that's this Generation 5 Pokemon, Haxorus. With its insane 147 base attack stat, this Pokemon has one job and one job only, and that's to attack with everything it's got. Its moveset is First Impression, which always moves first, but only on this Pokemon's first turn. Outrage for physical stab dragon type damage, Close Combat to check both ice and steel types, and finally Poison Jab to back those fairy types into a corner. And all this is further amplified by this Pokemon's held item, Choice Band, which locks this Pokemon into using only one move, but in return boosts that physical damage significantly. And honestly, I think that's a-okay, especially when you have supporting Pokemon like Cyclizar that actually want to cycle Pokemon in and out of battle, so you can get first impression value and other moves without worrying too much about Choice Band's limitations. This Haxorus also has the ability Mold Breaker, which lets their moves completely ignore the abilities of the enemy Pokemon. Next up is a Generation 8 Pokemon that recently received an evolution. But since Archaludon's base stats are the same as pseudo-legendaries, and we've only got one spot for them, we won't actually include it on the team, and instead we've got Duraludon, who's still a really good choice. Having the same speed as its evolution, but losing a bit of tankiness makes it a very solid option, especially when you think about the following build for this Pokemon. We've got Stealth Rocks to set up hazard damage for the enemy, Thunder Wave to inflict a status ailment, Flash Cannon for a strong stab move against ice and fairy types, and finally Dragon Tail to help Duraludon pivot in and out of battle. However, the asset that makes Duraludon a superior pick is its held item, Eviolite, which essentially gives it the tankiness it would have had in its evolution, since it technically is now able to use this item. This one is definitely a big brain pick, but hopefully you guys can see the logic here. And for its ability, we're going with Light Metal, which halves Duraludon's weight and can catch enemies off guard. Now it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. The pseudo-legendary that made it onto the best Dragon-type Pokemon team ever. And that's got to be our boy, Dragapult. And it's not just because you guys voted for this Pokemon, which, if you did vote, thanks for being a part of the video, but also because of this Pokemon's insane 142 speed and 120 attack stat, which gives it the ability to outspeed and one-shot every other Dragon-type pseudo-legendary. So yeah, we've got ourselves a clear winner here. For its moveset, we've got Dragon Darts being its strong Dragon-type move, U-Turn as a pivot option, Sucker Punch to outspeed any faster threats, as if they even existed, and Phantom Force just to cheese on your opponents a bit. All this is further amplified by the held item Life Orb, and this Pokemon's ability Infiltrator helps it ignore any potential walls that the opponent may have set up. All in all, this is a strong Dragon-type team, but now we need its leader, the best of the best, and that's got to be this Generation 8 Pokemon. Reintroducing Dracovic. which many of you may have forgotten about since it's technically not accessible in the new Scarlet and Violet Pokemon games. But let me remind you of this Pokemon's supremacy. Dracovish was one of the most dominant Pokemon in Sword and Shield, and with the moveset of Vicious Rend, it can easily destroy entire teams, dare I say, even nations. And since the power of this move is doubled if the user moves before the target, well then, the rest of the build just complements that entirely. We've got Outrage for stab, Psychic Fangs to destroy walls and deal psychic damage, and Rock Tomb to slow down any Pokemon that think they can hang with us. But this moveset is nothing without our held item today, and that's Choice Scarf that takes our signature move Vicious Rend and juices it up, almost always guaranteeing that we move first. Throw in the ability Strong Jaws and you can see why this is the captain of the best Dragon-type Pokemon team ever built. But what do you guys think? Any honorable mentions I might have forgotten about? And which type should we tackle next? Let us know in the comments down below and be sure to check out one of these videos here next.